Good day everyone, I am Mark Joseph J. Bailon at ang ide-discuss namin ngayon ay tungkol sa global effort to combat climate change. The causes and impact of global climate change can only be addressed effectively by a concerted international effort. Every country needs to play its part to reduce global concentrations of greenhouse GHGs and adapt to the impact of climate change. At narito naman ang evolution of the UN Framework Conventions on the Climate Change. Noong 1990, IPCC First Assessment Report underscores the seriousness of climate change and link emissions from human activity to the warming of the Earth's surface beyond natural effort. Ang IPCC or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change ay binuo ng United Nations Environment Program o UNEP at ng World Meteorological Organizations or WMO. Its role is to provide policymakers with objective scientific assessment of climate change, its impact and potential mitigations and adoptions options. Ang sumunod dito ay the draft of the Framework Conventions deliberate at the UN Conference on Environment and Development or UNCED in Rio de Janeiro. The Preparatory Committee of UNCED and the Main Committee of the Rio meeting was chaired by Singapore's Ambassador at large Tomiko. It led to the landmark UNFCCC adopted by the United Nations. The framework required governments to develop policies and strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions within their national boundaries and adapt to the irreversible climate change. The convergence on the climate change enjoy near universal memberships, making it one of the most global supported international agreement under the UN. Ang sabi dito, the draft of the Framework Conventions was discussed at the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro. It led to the adoptions of the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. This framework requires governments to develop policies and strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change within their own countries. The UNFCCC has nearly universal membership, making it one of the most widely supported international agreements under the UN. It aims to address climate change through global cooperations and collective actions. Noong 1997, the Kyoto Protocol attendees negotiated with Part 1 developed countries or Annex 1 parties, agreeing to binding targets international agreement under the UN. The Kyoto Protocol was a significant international agreement that aimed to address climate change by setting binding targets for greenhouse gas emission reductions. The negotiations involved 41 developed countries, known as Annex parties, who agreed to this target under the United Nations. The Annex I parties were a group of industrial countries that were considered to have historical responsibility for the majority of global greenhouse gas emissions. These countries were expected to take the lead at reducing their emissions and providing financial and technological support to developing countries. The negotiations for Kyoto Protocol took place at the late 1990s and concluded in 1997. During these negotiations, the Annex I parties agreed to binding target for reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by a specific amount below their 1990 levels. These targets were set for a commitment period from 2008 to 2012. Noong 2005, Kyoto Protocol came into effect. The Kyoto Protocol officially came into effect on February 16, 2005. This marks a significant milestone in the international effort to address climate change. The protocol was designed to operationalize the commitment made under the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, and set binding target for greenhouse gas emission reduction. Noong 2007 naman, Bali Roadmap established a new negotiating track to finalize a binding climate agreement involving all parties. The Bali Roadmap was established during the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Bali, Indonesia in 2007. It set the stage for a new negotiating track to finalize a binding climate agreement involving all parties. The Bali Roadmap recognized the need for enhanced global actions to address climate change and emphasized the importance of engaging all countries, both developed and developing. In finding a comprehensive solutions, it aimed to ensure that all nations took responsibility for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to the impact of climate change. One of the key outcomes of the Bali Roadmap was the decision to launch negotiations for a post-2012 climate agreement, which would replace the Kyoto Protocol. These negotiations aim to establish a new framework that will be applicable to all countries, moving away from the distinction between developed and developing nations. Noong 2009, Copenhagen Climate Conference did not reach consensus, but a number of developed and developing countries announced targets on emission reducing effort up to 2020. The Copenhagen Climate Conference, also known as the 15th Conference of the Parties or COP15 to the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change or UNFCCC, took place in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2009. While the conference did not result in legally binding agreement, it did see a number of developed and developing countries announce target and emission reducing effort up to 2020.
Evolution of the United Framework Convention on Climate Change. In year 2010, Cancun Agreement formalized the reduction pledge and adoption decision on mitigation, adoption, finance, technology, and reducing emission for deforestation and forest degradation plus. In year 2021, the Durban Platform set out an agreement on the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol. There was agreement to launch negotiation on a new legally binding global agreement that would apply to all countries and come into effect in 2020. The Durban Conference also agreed on a package of a key decision, including the setting up a green climate fund to channel climate related finance resources for developing countries to reduce emission and to adapt. In year 2012, at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Doha, parties agreed to a new commitment period of 8 years under the Kyoto Protocol, agree a path to raise necessary ambition to respond to climate change. They also endorsed the complementation of new institutions and agree ways and mean to deliver scaled-up climate, finance, and technology to developing countries. In year 2013, in Warsaw, Poland, the parties produced a set of decisions including a rule book for reducing emission for deforestation and forest degradation and a mass loss and damage caused by long-term climate change impacts. They also agreed to communication their respective contribution toward to the global climate change agreement well in advance of COP 2021 in Paris in 2015. In year 2014 in Lima, the parties agree on various ground rules to guide the submission of their respective contribution toward the global climate agreement. Pledge made by both developed and developing countries prior to and during the COP also took the capitalization of the new Green Climate Fund GCF as an initial $10 billion target. In year 2015, on December 12, 2015, at the 21st Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC COP21 in Paris in 1996, parties adopted a new climate agreement applicable to all parties. The Paris Agreement which will take effect first 2020, aims to hold the increase in global average temperature to well be below 2 Celsius and pursue effort to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 Celsius.